On this episode of China Uncensored, I wonder what China will buy with its new military budget. The U.S. sends an aircraft carrier to Vietnam. And finally, the sky isn't falling. That's just China's out-of-control space station. This is China Uncensored. Hi, welcome to China Uncensored. I'm your host, Chris Chappell. First, an update from last week. The Chinese military got the big pay raise they were asking for. $175 billion. That's a jump from last year, but it still can't compare to the United States. The Pentagon is asking for one of the biggest budget boosts in U.S. history.
We will have a military like we've never had before. We're going to have an incredible military.
I assume that means we're finally getting Jaegers. The increase in China's military spending comes along with China keeping a projected GDP growth of 6.5% this year. At least, that's what Chinese Premier Li Keqiang announced. Think they'll succeed? Well, considering Li Keqiang also once said China's GDP figures are man-made and therefore unreliable, I'd say yes, they have a pretty good chance of hitting that 6.5% target. U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson has criticized Chinese investment in Africa.
Chinese investment does have the potential to address Africa's infrastructure gap, but its approach has led to mounting debt and few, if any, jobs in most countries. When coupled with the political and fiscal pressure, this endangers Africa's natural resources and its long-term economic political stability.
Recently, the Chinese Communist Party has been using what's called the One Belt, One Road initiative to offer big loans to developing nations around the world. But the party has been offering infrastructure loans to African countries for years. It's been called a new form of colonialism. In particular, it's been a great way for the Chinese regime to drain African countries of their natural resources. But it still has been unable to make inroads into the wealthiest African nation, Wakanda. The Communist Party would love to get their hands on some of that sweet, sweet vibranium. A U.S. aircraft carrier visited Vietnam, and unlike last time, it didn't kill anyone. This is the first carrier visit to Vietnam since the fall of Saigon in 1975. It's a 4-day port of call. Crew will visit a hospital and center for victims of some rather nasty weapons used by the U.S. during the Vietnam War, like Agent Orange. That sounds like fun. The reason the U.S. and Vietnam are burying the hatchet, or the Agent Orange as it were, is because Vietnam is at least less upset at the U.S. than at China. The Chinese regime has been aggressively expanding in the South China Sea, in waters claimed by Vietnam. And considering the violent history between China and Vietnam over the last, say, 1,000 years, Vietnam is having flashbacks. Of course, Chinese state-run media says they totally don't care. Totally. And it's not just Vietnam. The Chinese regime has angered a lot of its neighbors because of territorial conflicts in the South China Sea. But at least the Chinese Communist Party cares deeply about the region's environment. That's why they're building a marine park. My favorite state-run media, the Global Times, wrote, "Protection of unique and rich resources in the South China Sea has always been given great importance, especially when some of the resources, such as coral reefs, are very fragile." And the Chinese regime really does care about protecting the coral reefs, especially now that the coral reefs in the region are almost completely gone because they were destroyed by the Chinese regime. And the most powerful man, Xi Jinping, may have another title added to his growing list, one that already includes General Secretary of the Communist Party, President of the Nation, and Commander-in-Chief of the military. His newest title? Living Bodhisattva. That's a sort of Buddha on Earth who carries out acts of compassion to help mankind. Okay, this may not be his official Communist Party title. Remember, they're atheist. But the party secretary of the largely Tibetan province of Qinghai, Wang Guosheng, said that Tibetans who live there have been saying they view Xi Jinping as a deity. I mean, it makes sense. Xi Jinping is incredibly powerful. He just granted himself the role of president for life. People have photos of him in their homes and even churches. And he can use supernatural powers to generate GDP growth. Okay, so in Chinese, it's kind of like calling someone a living saint. So Party Secretary Wang might not have been that serious. But it was still some impressive brown-nosing, especially since it's also a slight dig at the Dalai Lama. Traditionally, the Dalai Lama is considered the living reincarnation of a specific Bodhisattva. And Party Secretary Wang said that the Tibetans see only Xi Jinping as a living Bodhisattva. Ooh, burn. And just a friendly reminder, China's out-of-control space station, called Tiangong-1, is expected to crash land somewhere on Earth in the next few weeks. Usually when a satellite falls out of orbit, it mostly burns up in the atmosphere. But according to the US-funded Aerospace Corporation, there is a chance that a small amount of Tiangong-1 debris may survive re-entry and impact the ground. Where will it fall? Aerospace uses this map to show where it's most likely to land. The highest probability is in the yellow areas. Hey, wait a minute. I'm in one of the yellow areas. What's that, Shelley? The odds of it hitting anyone are 1,000,000 times smaller than winning the lottery. Oh, good, I think. If you do end up having a close encounter with Tiangong-1, there may be a highly toxic and corrosive fuel on board, so please don't touch the debris or inhale any vapors it may emit. So what do you think? Leave your comments below. Thanks for watching this episode of China Uncensored. Once again, I'm your host, Chris Chappell. See you next time. Well, the Chinese Communist Party is certainly rotten, but you know what never goes bad? Food from Thrive Life. Thrive Life sells freeze-dried meals that stay fresh. And if you order through the link in the description below, China Uncensored gets a cut. I wouldn't ask you to eat their food if I didn't also personally love it. So support your belly and China Uncensored by buying some delicious food from Thrive Life. The link is below.